So yeah, I'm back. Happy first video of 2022 everybody. Last year was one hell of a productive year for this channel, wasn't it? I reached over 100 subscribers and I'm currently sitting at just over 179, which for my channel is absolutely fantastic. With the festive celebrations and 2021 as a whole behind us, it's time for brand new content for this channel. And I know what you're thinking to yourself. Luke, you said at the end of your Magic Railroad review that you'd be taking a break from the franchise, and you're right. In answer to that, I'm only hopping back into the franchise momentarily for Series 6 and 7. I figured I'd do this because when I next jump into the review series properly, I'm thinking around about the summertime, I'll be able to jump straight into the Hit Entertainment series and focus solely on that without the whiplash of going from Series 7 to Series 8, which is very jarring. So think of this less as a start to the review series again, and more as a epilogue to the series that I did last year. Plus, in the end, you're getting more content from my channel, so it's a win-win for everybody. But, yeah. Shall we begin? So, Thomas and the Magic Railroad. That was quite the thing to happen to the franchise, wasn't it? Regardless of how people felt about it, this did not do well for both the career of Britt Allcroft or the show as a whole. And that stain was unfortunately permanent. After Britt stepped down as the head deputy chairperson of her own company, now called Ghislaine Entertainment, Series 6 was put into production. Same production team, same narrators as the last series, everything back to business as usual after the huge cinemagic project that was Magic Railroad. However, it would be the last of many things. It was the last time David Mitton would write his own stories for the show, the last to be narrated in America by Alec Baldwin, and supposedly the last to be produced solely under the same production crew, as the franchise would later be bought from Ghislaine by Hit Entertainment, the same year of the series' release. Series 6 was first broadcast in 2002. With the name change of the company and a feature film in between the release of this series and Series 5, many fans debate on whether or not this and Series 7 are part of the classic series, leading to it being nicknamed the Ghislaine era, the ones either considered not as good as what came before, or just somewhat in between. Where do I personally stand on this? While I am heavily nostalgic for Series 6, as I did grow up with a lot of DVDs and VHS tapes of episodes, as well as grew up watching episodes actually broadcast on TV, Series 6 is my least favourite of the classic series. It doesn't do a disservice to the franchise like what the Magic Railroad did, and there are some genuinely great moments in this. Scratch that, there are some fantastic moments in this, but fucking hell does it do a lot wrong. Firstly, let's address the first major point of praise. This series does not follow up on the story of Magic Railroad at all. No magic buffers or Magic Railroad, no real life humans, no station platforms desolate from wooden figure people, and no mention of any characters whatsoever from the film itself. I don't know if it was either because Magic Railroad did poorly, both critically and financially, and it was a decision there and then that they chose not to continue the story on, or if the film's story was always going to be a one-off from the start and not canon to the main series. But I'm happy with the decision. We're back to basics. 26 episodes of talking engines on a railway that now feels real again, with the appeal of the show back on track. That pun was intended that time. So, now we're back to the standards of the show. How do these stories compare to previous series? They're good, for the most part, but a lot of them do have teething troubles. Many teething troubles. But first, I'll talk about the good stuff. The vast majority of Series 6 is not as over-the-top dramatic as Series 5. I mean, don't get me wrong, they put their all into making a lot of Series 5 an action-packed thrill ride, and that was why it did so great. But looking back on it, I feel like maybe they were trying a bit too hard and could have had more down-to-earth stories without the cinematic ka-chow. Series 6 is almost more of a return to form. Regardless of what the story is, it feels more inclined to the kind of stories we'd see in Series 3 or 4. Very dialogue-heavy character stories where, when accidents happen, they are for the most part grounded in some real-life sense. No mysteries of a sentient boulder, no story of an engine falling off a bridge to its death, and no avalanches burying an engine alive. The tone is much more laid back. The one exception being Thomas the Jet Engine, where Thomas is set to deliver a jet engine that accidentally gets switched on by Cranky, pushes him down the line at incredible speed, complete with the return of the William Tell Overture runaway theme. A very controversial story amongst the fandom, actually, which, given the concept, is understandable, though personally, I like it. It's riding the line of realism, but it's not done distastefully. The jet engine doesn't send Thomas taking off to the skies above, or jumps off the tracks to start rolling along the road. There's a level of restraint for the universe it's set in. It's also done in a very humorous way, with funny reactions from the characters.
Want a race, Thomas? Beat Bertie? Never mind.
Speaking of humour, this is one of the funniest series that I've seen of the show so far. Like in Series 5, the jokes are not knee slappers and not every joke lands, but a good few left me chuckling. One that comes to mind is this moment in Thomas Percy and the Squeak. Earlier in the episode, when talking about the soon arrival of Alicia Botti, the famous singer, Gordon explains that she is a coloratura, someone who can sing high notes very loud. Then in that moment when she climbs aboard Clarabelle and screams seeing a mouse, her voice shatters windows close by, and when she stops, Gordon just chimes in and says,
"Definitely a coloratura," said Gordon.
I don't know why, but the way they set that joke up is just funny to me. One last thing to give praise to, which actually involves one of its flaws, is that none of the Series 5 continuity is followed up on. No new locations that we were introduced to, not a lot of the new characters from that series are back, no previous stories are mentioned. It almost feels like a completely clean slate, ignoring past events. Granted, that was also an issue with Series 5, which I didn't notice until I watched Series 6 and thought back on it, but it's still very odd, especially for a show that, in Series 1 to 4, loved calling back to old stories for world building. I mean, true, that was due to the fucked up story order, but still, that was something. Series 6 may not follow previously established series stories, but at least it follows its own continuity and consistency like the other ones did, even if it's only character stuff. For example, new character Salty the Dockyard Diesel is always at Brendam Docks after his first day on the island at the quarry. New character Elizabeth the Steam Lorry, after her restoration from being found by Thomas's driver, is consistently seen working around the island, even right up until the very last episode of the series. Yeah, that's about it. Now I can really start to get into the big problems of Series 6, the first of those being with the story's morals. Now, I praised the hell out of Series 1 to 5 for their subtle way of delivering morals in their stories. It was nothing groundbreaking, the show is meant for kids after all, but they never really forced the morals into a particular story, and I attribute that to mostly following Audrey's writing style, unless it was the US dub. Here, however, these morals are starting to feel a bit blatant. Harvey to the Rescue, for example, has the engines take a dislike to the new engine Harvey, and they don't think it can be a proper engine. How? Just by flat out saying that he's different.
Harvey's different?
said Henry. Surely the Fat Controller won't let him pull coaches, sniffed Gordon. He's just cranky on wheels, said James.
Then, when Percy has an accident with some trucks, on Duck's branch line for some reason, as he is at Bulgy's bridge, Harvey cleans up the mess and the engines just all immediately accept him.
Well done, Harvey, said Gordon.
Very useful, said James.
There's also these strange lines from Percy before and after Harvey helps him.
He's not taking my mail, said Percy. You can take my mail, said Percy.
Like, what was the point of that? It's like, oh, that guy who I thought was useless actually did a thing today. I know a job that he could do. Be Postman Pat. But yeah, the moral is present, but it's not naturally told because the characters just say the messages for us. The moral itself is a good one to teach kids about how people that are different from us are just as important, and has been taught well not just in other shows and films, but by the Thomas and Friends series itself. Hint, hint. But here, when the message is spelled out for us, it doesn't leave us with anything to think about and thus takes away its replay value. And it's not a one-off. Other stories in Series 6 are like this. Scaredy Engines is about not making fun of your friends, and it's spelt out loud. Duncan Duncan is about not being impatient, and it's spelt out loud. Edward the Very Useful Engine is about showing respect to your elders, and it's spelt out loud. You see where I'm going with this, right? Series 6 is not the first series to have a moral message forced into the story. Even some of the older episodes fell into those traps. And again, they are meant to be stories for kids, so they're not meant to be groundbreaking writing material by any means. It just sucks to see these messages not told as well as they could be. Thankfully, the vast majority of Series 6 stories are more subtle and are still enjoyable, even if on occasion I struggle to take these episodes that seriously. This is the point in the ongoing series where things start to feel a little... what's the word I'm looking for? Childish. Mainly character-related stuff that I will save for later, but there are a lot of very kid-friendly and undignified moments. Percy being left out in the snow in Jack Frost and icicles start to form on his boiler and face, scaring James in the process. Diesel in the world's strongest engine where he tries to pull some trucks without knowing their brakes are on and is sent flying off an edge of the docks onto a boat. And Percy in Percy's Chocolate Crunch where he crashes through a chocolate factory.
Yuck! He groaned.
I've never been this dirty.
I feel like this crash is a bit more severe than it's being made out to be here. It's very nitpicky as you can still take a lot of what's going on seriously, but it is a bit distracting. I guess the last thing I should talk about is the two episodes that are actually not focused on any of the engines, but instead a fleet of construction vehicles known as Jack and the Pack. Jack Jumps In and A Friend in Need. A two-part story focusing on newcomer Jack the Front Loader meeting the Sodor Construction Company for the first time, making a big mistake as a result of not properly following orders, and then makes up for it by saving Thomas later from a collapsing bridge. This was in fact a setup for a spin-off series to be filmed and released separate to the Thomas and Friends series. It's not the first spin-off show if we're going to count its sister series also made by David Bitton named Tugs, and I guess technically Shining Time Station, which we all saw what that led to. But it is the first to be directly tied to the show itself with these two episodes. With the research I've done, and by that I mean looking up the fandom's Wikipedia and checking the Steaming to Legacy documentary by Smurfy Dan, when Hit Entertainment took over in 2002, they initially scrapped the idea of the spin-off, claiming it proved to be too expensive to continue. 26 episodes were planned only to be tossed aside, which to me is really unfortunate because I like what they did for these episodes. Yeah, the morals were a bit spoon-fed, but the pack with their brief appearance seemed to be a very likeable collection of characters. Would you guys like me to talk about this series when I come back to look at the Hit Era series? I'll leave a comment down below for you to have your say. But for now, I'll say I really liked what they did for these stories, and I am disappointed it was scrapped so early on in its development. That I think wraps up all I can say about the stories, which, in conclusion, are good, but not as good as they could have been. They're funny, mostly laid back, and carefully follow their own continuity, but ignoring previously established continuity from other series, forcing morals and having really childish elements, holds it back. None of it holds a candle to Series 1 to 4's stories, but they are at least on par with Series 5's to me. As I always do, I'll start with the new characters. These characters feel like Thomas characters, from their designs, their personalities, and different dynamics with other characters. Salty the Dockyard Diesel is my personal favourite new character in this series. An engine with a love for the sea, tales of travelling ships, and a desire to work hard near it. Even if his first job isn't working at the docks in his first episode, leading to him feeling a bit homesick, he still gets on with the job at hand because he knows how important it is to the railway. When he is eventually sent to work at the docks and goes back to being his old self, he starts to form unique interactions with the others. In Salty's secret, Bill and Ben initially can't stand his stories and are jealous of how he gets the trucks to move without them causing any trouble.
Driver says he'll bore the bolt off us with his stories, huffed Bill.
But after he helps them complete the job at the quarry, in their next episode together, No Sleep for Cranky, they end up trapped at the docks until tomorrow, and all night they listen in awe and wonderment to his stories of the sea.
Reminds me of a lonely old Grand Banks lighthouse keeper. Not another one of your stories, cried Cranky. Oh, please, Salty, they chimed. We haven't heard it.
That little inclusion made this scene all the more wholesome to watch, much to the annoyance of the returning Cranky the Crane, who also shares that nice little dynamic with Salty, constantly working with someone who won't stop talking while being stuck up in a very high place all day and night would indeed make someone, well, cranky.
Ahoy there, Cranky, cried Salty. Where have you been? Snapped Cranky. And a good day to you too, Captain.
Then in Salty's next appearance, Gordon takes a tumble. His teasing of Gordon triggers his pride in his image and is what leads him to an embarrassing accident, though he still apologises through telling the other engines in the end, showing he never really means for anyone to get harmed. What a standout to the series. Harvey the Crane Engine is good for his debut story. The moral isn't handled great, but you do feel bad for him that it's only his first day and almost everybody is talking badly about him. But after that, he just kind of fades into the background. He becomes the breakdown train with a face, years before they would even give the breakdown cranes their own faces in the first place. He shares no unique interactions with any characters, and while he does become a mainstay for the series, for Series 6 after No Sleep for Cranky he just disappears. Never seen working in the background anywhere. A very weird thing to do, introducing a new character, have him appear in 2 episodes in his debut series and just never use him as a main character again. But he is better than the one-hit wonder characters from Series 5 like Derek or Bertram. At least he got more than 1 episode appearance. Elizabeth the Quarry Lorry works better as a character than I initially remembered. At first, she seems like an old forgotten lorry in a shed used to get Thomas out of trouble when he breaks a side rod. Only for us to find out later in that episode that she was the very first lorry the Fat Controller ever learned to drive. I'd say it's not a retcon and more so world building with information that was never really made clear in the previous series. She's fully restored by the returning Jem Cole, that was a nice cameo, and while she stays absent for a little while, she starts to appear again in the second half of the series and has some nice little moments with other characters. She shows concern over Percy being covered in ice from the blizzard in Jack Frost.
Oh my dear, Elizabeth chuffed to Percy. It looks like Jack Frost really got you then.
She gets annoyed at Duncan for whistling so loud.
Stop that nonsense, Duncan.
And in Rusty Saves the Day, she is cleverly tricked by Rusty into helping them restore Skarloey and Rheneas' line.
If only we had a lorry to help us, Rusty sighed. Elizabeth stopped. Well, I couldn't possibly help you. I'm a quarry lorry. Well, we do need a special kind of lorry, Rusty teased. I am a special kind of lorry, protested Elizabeth. It requires hauling, said Rusty. I can haul, said Elizabeth proudly. And pulling heavy branches, added Rusty. Well, of course I can pull. So you'll do it, said Rusty. Well, of course.
Another funny highlight for Series 6. She's a good addition to the show, nothing more or less. The pack characters, like the 2 episodes they have in this series, are very brief but feel extremely natural to the universe. I guess there is the unfair advantage of knowing they will eventually get their own spin-off show, which justifies them being slightly underdeveloped as characters. Mainly Byron the Bulldozer, as he literally only gets 1 line and Jack jumps in.
I don't need help, Boom Byron. Try Kelly the Crane.
But I don't know, I just like them. For a series that cuts away from Sodor momentarily to succeed in selling us on these characters and their type of work without it feeling jarring, that is quite the accomplishment. My personal favourites being Oliver the Excavator and Kelly the Crane, but more so in their designs as they're not fully realised characters. Yet. Now for the returning familiar faces, and unfortunately we have a problem. Remember how in certain episodes of the previous series some characters were starting to act, well, out of character? You know, Gordon in trouble with mud saying he hasn't the time to worry about being clean for the Express, Toby and Toby's Discovery suddenly believing in ghosts and being afraid of the dark. Well, now for Series 6 we're starting to see a lot more than just one starting to act differently. Edward, while mostly still portrayed as his wise, friendly self, for some baffling reason, is one of the engines that immediately takes a disliking to Harvey.
He doesn't even look like an engine, said Edward.
Why was that done? Was it so that you could have your main character act as the kind one, even though Edward should naturally be more kinder than Thomas? There's also Bill and Ben, who, while their development of friendship with Salty works great, they for some reason have an issue with working with Diesels? Despite the fact that Mavis is right there.
Ahoy, mateys, salty pride of the seven seas. I'm a new Diesel and I'm here to give you some help. Bill and Ben didn't think they needed any help, especially from a Diesel.
Skarloey, who's usually the brave and determined engine, has no faith in repairing his line before the deadline.
She's right, he said. We'll never get it done in 2 weeks.
But the character that suffered the most with the inconsistencies is Percy. This was also the point of the series where he would start to get dumber and dumber as a character, and it's another part of the episode starting to feel a bit more childish, just by how stupid he gets. He was never meant to be the smartest in the series prior, but he wasn't a brain-dead child. He was a slightly less experienced Thomas who stood for no nonsense and was his cheeky but loyal best friend. Compare this...
I say, you engines, I'm to take some trucks to Thomas's Junction. The Fat Controller chose me especially. He must know I'm a really useful engine.
To this...
Edward is a useless old steam pot, Gordon sniffed. He should be retired. But he doesn't have tyres.
And the difference is clear as day. Like Edward, he does have episodes where he is in character, like The Fogman and Percy's Chocolate Crunch, but seeing this level of embarrassment was painful. I have two favourite old characters from this series, but not for the reasons you'd think. Before, it was because I felt like they naturally balanced out the appearances of these characters so that none ever cast shadows over the other. But here, it's like my favourites are by default, as none of the other characters have standout episodes to themselves, at least to me. With that said, my favourite oldies but goldies are Gordon and Toby, for reasons I'll get into with their standout episodes on my top 5 episodes from the series. But yeah, as a whole, these characters are alright. We've got some great new ones, but sort of inconsistent old ones. The new characters were handled much better than most of the new ones in Series 5, but our returnees? I'm sorry, I just don't feel like they were done that well. I also want to take this time to pay tribute to the engines that were completely left out for Series 6 and have since 2001 been left buried in the depths of the 90s. Duke the Lost Engine and Boko the Diesel Engine. They never did make it back after they disappeared with a bunch of other characters in the Magic Railroad. Gone, but not forgotten. Sir Handel doesn't count because he for some reason didn't have an upscale model built for him until Series 10 years later. Anyways, onto the production side of Series 6. Now, I want to be fair with the look of Series 6, as we're essentially jumping from Thomas's cinematic debut back down to the show with a substantially smaller budget. So, it's not going to look as good as the film, that's understandable. But this series is just so ugly. Comparing this to the bright bold colours of Series 3, the warm and fuzzy colours of Series 4, and the cinematic style look of Series 5, it feels like we've jumped into watching a show where the engines look more like toy trains on a kid's first model railway. Not all the time, there's plenty of instances where they look close to realistic engines, but a lot of the time, ugh. I think it's something to do with them being painted in matte paint and the lifeless lighting, which is also why the sets don't really draw me in either. With the exception of the nighttime shots when there is a lack of terrible lighting to get in the way, the sets look pretty good, especially episodes like Jack Frost and that one shot of the docks in Gordon Takes a Tumble, but the rest? No. Particularly with how many scenes take place on generic stretches of track alongside high green hedges and how the shot composition never really gives us a chance to take those sets in. When they use locations from the previous series like the Watermill, Brendam Docks and Knapford Station, they look much better, but the new series sets? I see the potential, but they're just so basic. Which is unfortunate, since, as I mentioned in my Series 5 review, this was the first time they decided to upscale to a 16:9 widescreen ratio. Like, why give us more of this space and not really take advantage of being able to show the scale of these sets? Yeah, the engines feel larger than before, thus making them feel more real, but again, their crap paint just takes away from that. Not helping was a lot of these shots of the engines just planted in front of the camera, rolling past endless lines of hedges, and on some occasions, they even repeat those shots for other episodes. Granted, that beats reusing shots from previous series as much as Series 5 did, but really? The same setups of engines just rolling along? Series 1 had something very similar with those shots of the engines running by the endless countryside, but I can at least give the production team a pass on those bits because they were still getting their bearings on making the show for the first time, 18 years ago. Like, don't do this for the 6th entry in the show. Like, what happened? Was the series somehow rushed? Was it because they tried to set up the Jack in the Pack episodes separate from the Sodor sets? Did hit acquiring the rights fuck up the production cycle? Was it due to the Magic Railroad flopping in cinemas despite selling well in merchandise? I don't know! There's also a couple of continuity issues with the geography of where the engines work on the island, but that's been a running issue with the show, which I'm just going to accept it as being unavoidable so long as the stories are entertaining. A new issue specifically for this series is the very tacky editing. On some occasions, the shots don't really flow together that well, which adds on to the problem of earlier, where the backgrounds don't really have much time to be taken in, and sometimes the narration from Michelangelis is cut too close together.
What's a coloratura? asked Thomas. It means she can sing high notes very, very loud.
It can also make the openings to a lot of these episodes feel the same, with how I think almost every episode starts with a fade-out, fade-in montage of just showing the engines working together.
The engines on the island of Sodor like feeling responsible, reliable, and really useful. They work hard to complete their jobs on time. They don't like confusion and delay. The Fat Controller's engines love their work. Gordon likes pulling the express. Thomas likes his branch line. And Percy likes taking the mail. The Fat Controller's engines love being shiny and clean. It makes them feel cheerful as they puff across the island of Sodor. All the engines on the island of Sodor love their work.
Which I think I probably should have brought this into the story section, but it's because these openings are written so similarly that leaves nothing for a unique beginning to the episode. But hey, at least the sound effects are still as great as before. The last two aspects of the production that I don't really have that much to say about are the narration and the music. Michelangelis brings the same energy to this series as he has done so far, something you can really notice in episodes like Thomas the Jet Engine.
The driver tried to put on the brakes, but Thomas couldn't stop. Oh boy! Signals were changed and points were switched. Thomas had never been so excited.
He does get a little bit inconsistent with his character voices, feeling like he sometimes forgets which character he is voicing.
Pa, said James, thinking no one could hear. I could handle those diesels with bent buffers and a busted boiler. What if the hot air balloon takes our passengers away? Chuffed James. What will happen to us then?
But he is still great. Alec Baldwin, on the other hand, since I'm now comparing the UK and the US dubs, well, I already wasn't really a fan of his Series 5 work despite him having occasionally entertaining voices for characters, but fucking hell he sounds so low on energy here. I understand he wanted to leave the series to pursue his acting career, that's absolutely fine, Ringo also left after Series 2 so he could further his career in music. I totally get it, but because of how badly The Magic Railroad did critically in cinemas, and maybe it was because he was going through a divorce with Kim Basinger, compared to Angelus, it's night and day.
Hello, James, muttered Percy icily. Scary Jack Frost, cried James, and he raced away as fast as his wheels could carry him. He didn't stop until he got back to the sheds.
Hello, James, muttered Percy icily. Scary Jack Frost, cried James, and he raced away as fast as his wheels could carry him. He didn't stop until he got back to the sheds.
The music by Mike and Jr. is as great as it's always been. It's probably the most consistent with sounding like a natural transition from Series 5, very similar to how that series followed up on Series 4, and how Series 2 followed up on Series 1 with reoccurring songs, but enough unique ones to help it stand out. Something that I actually really love and respect about the changing from series to series, constantly upgrading the synthesizers without a sudden jarring switch from one to another where there would be a noticeable difference. Some memorable melodies from this series for me being Salty's theme, the recomposition of Donald and Douglas's theme, Gordon's theme, and the return of the William Tell Overture. I've noticed a lot of these episodes end with the same closing melody, but not like the one that transitions into the credits like in Series 1 and 2, but one of those jingles that just says, "This episode is ending now," probably to amplify whatever the message was in this story as it comes to a close.
Thank you, sir, said Cyril. And thank you, said Toby. New inventions are all very well, but they don't make my axles tingle, said Percy. But the engines had learnt a lesson. Even troublesome trucks can do you a favour sometimes, chuffed Thomas. Like getting rid of smelly old diesel, puffed Percy. They are nice buffers, Bill said. Thanks, Ben said. I'm sorry I teased you. That's all right, Bill said. I was naughty too. Of course you were, said Ben. We're twins.
Nothing really distracting, just something I noticed. With that said, let's move on to... oh wait, yeah, I completely forgot to mention the new songs and music videos that use deleted, stock, or original footage from the show. To put it brief, half of these songs are bangers. And the other half is either just okay or very bad.
Down by the docks, that's the place to be. Down by the docks, gateway to the sea. Down by the dockside, we are the team, working together, just like family.
It's a winter wonderland, little engine working hard. It's no plough heaving, bother this silly snow. Don't hold me up, please don't delay. Must get to my winter wonderland. Choo-choo, don't be afraid of the dark. It's easily explained. You see why things go bump in the night. Boo, boo, boo. Choo-choo, don't wander from your track. And don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid of the dark.
Nothing much more to say about them. On to a new segment that's kind of an extension to an already existing section, my bottom 5 episodes. I know, it feels like I've done nothing but shit on Series 6, and now here I am beating a dead horse by talking about what I think are the bad episodes of the series. But I feel like this section will allow me to go more in depth as to why I don't like these episodes, rather than separating them into sections throughout this review. I did think about doing one of these for Series 1 to 5, but I feel like it would just get down to nitpicking with those, whereas with Series 6, it is a lot easier to spot these bad episodes. So, let's start with number 5. Harvey to the rescue. I guess it should come as no surprise that the most underdeveloped newbie of Series 6 is in my bottom 5, isn't it? But yeah, as I stated, this episode does not do a good job in telling the moral of accepting differences, with inconsistent characters, poor pacing now that I think about it, and again, introducing a character who gets one more appearance after this episode, and that's it for the rest of the 26 episode run. Not much else to rant on other than what's already been said. Now time for the worst episodes that I actually do have a lot more stuff to complain about. Buffer bother. This episode isn't here because it tells a moral poorly or has characters behaving differently, but because it's just so boring. A boring story watching Bill complain about not getting new buffers instead of Ben and letting that distract him from his work. Watching the series up to this point, I never thought it possible to drag out a 4.5 minute runtime until now. Not only dragging the episode, but a story we don't really care about. We don't care about Bill wanting new buffers because he seems to be working just fine without them, so it just comes off as being selfish and needy. Not the kind where it's entertaining to watch, just annoying. And in the end, he crashes and just ends up being sent away for new buffers anyway. No clear message to take away and no real reason to care. Next! Rusty saves the day. Probably the weirdest and just an outright wrong episode in terms of continuity. Scarlowe and Rheneas' line becomes too expensive for Rusty to help with maintenance, so the Fat Controller closes almost the entire railway? What? The whole line? Like, how does the entire fucking railway that's been around for years, as it's based on the very similar Tallyclyn Railway in Wales, go from usable to such a horrible state in such a short amount of time? And why is the Fat Controller so adamant on closing that part of the line except the slate mines? Like, don't you need the rest of it to, deliver the slate? Certain smaller changes to geography and continuity I can either be on board with or let slide, but this one was just really weird. Percy and the Haunted Mine. Remember what I said earlier about Percy becoming an idiot? In this episode, he is at his dumbest. He becomes convinced that strange things are happening at an abandoned mine because of gnomes. A joke made by Donald and Douglas that he believes and does not piece it together that they are just garden gnomes until someone tells him. Percy, weren't you in an episode 1 series ago where you helped with station decorations? Surely you know what a garden gnome is, right? The shot of the building sinking into the collapsing mine is pretty cool, but why of all stories would you think Percy believing in naughty gnomes was a good idea? This was so embarrassing and kind of painful to sit through, but not as much as Middle Engine. It's poorly edited, tells a story that does not go anywhere and has no message to even deliver in the first place other than just make fun of James, and turns Ari and Bert from threatening diesels in Series 5 to just generic bullies. But the biggest problem myself and I am sure many others have with this story is one very specific scene. When Percy arrives at the coaling plant, Henry accidentally shunts him onto the tipper's loading ramp, where only trucks are meant to be on. And for some baffling reason, the Fat Controller doesn't have a go at Henry for shunting him on there in the first place, he doesn't have a go at Ari and Bert for getting him stuck between two trains so he'd somehow be mistaken for a truck that Henry doesn't see, but he has a go at Percy.
I'm very disappointed in you, Percy, he said. You know it's against the rules to go on the tipper's loading ramp. You will shunt trucks in the yard until I can get to the bottom of this.
Why? It'd be one thing if he blamed both Percy and the diesels, but putting all the blame on Percy for something that was completely out of his control? This makes about as much sense as, well, I guess the tipping machine being able to lift an engine when it's only meant to lift coal trucks. This is just an absolute mess of an episode that I can safely call the worst to come from Series 6, period. Alright, let's try and bring back the positive vibes by talking about the top 5 episodes. I'm sure we can mention a few good things before we close off.
Ahoy, mateys!
Twin Trouble. I enjoy this episode for how it explores the bond between Donald and Douglas. Any previous episodes that they've been the stars of, they were most often on their own, where each of their personality traits shone. Not since Series 2 did we ever really get to see them working together in an episode. While usually very strong and hard workers together, this episode looks to explore where their bond is broken. Donald is the more snappy and stubborn of the two and goes off working with Duck, while Douglas is also quite stubborn, but is the first to try and reach out to Donald after feeling lonely working without his brother, even if it doesn't work the first time. One particular scene I wanted to bring up is this one.
Did you shunt those trucks onto the other line? Donald asked. You said you wanted them on the other line, Duck replied. No, that other line. The other line. Donald was cross. Douglas would have known what I meant, he huffed.
That line has a deeper meaning than you first think. It says that even if Donald isn't clear on his instructions, if Douglas was there, he would just know what he means instinctively because they're brothers, solidifying the bond that they have, which makes it all the more heartfelt when they become friends again. A very good episode.
Ahoy, mateys!
Thomas Percy and the Squeak, and Thomas the Jet Engine. I put these two together because they're comedic stories with very different vibes. Thomas Percy and the Squeak has more of a story to tell than the other episode, with a good exploration into the friendship of Thomas and Percy, while also giving me a good chuckle with that coloratura part I mentioned before, as well as this scene.
Peasant, Gordon huffed snootily. Yes, I am pleasant, smiled Percy. He was glad somebody noticed.
And Thomas the Jet Engine is, as I also said before, just an episode played for laughs with a story that, while unrealistic, is still done in good taste. Not much else to say about them that I haven't said already, so I'll close them off by showing the funniest moment from Thomas the Jet Engine.
Hi, Gordon. Bye, Gordon.
Moving on.
Ahoy, mateys!
Scaredy Engines. Okay, while this episode doesn't come close to the spooks and chills of Series 5 or Ghost Train from Series 2, especially when you have the engines react like this to a ghost engine story told by Edward.
Ooh, spooky.
I can say that Scaredy Engines works at just how well it tells a story with the trio dynamic of Thomas, Percy and Duck working at the smelters together. Thomas is like the middle child who constantly teases Percy about being scared while acting like the braver engine, when in actuality, he's probably the most scared of the three when he gets left on his own and sets off a steam whistle. Duck, meanwhile, is the older brother who looks out for Percy and thinks Thomas deserves to be shown up and scared for how he behaved. And finally, Percy is the younger brother who doesn't like to be teased for his fears and made to feel small, but doesn't want Thomas to be left on his own after he gets scared because he is still, in the end, his best friend. I love that about this dynamic, and Scaredy Engines is one of the only episodes I can think of with this trio working together, which I think is such wasted potential. While not successful as a spooky episode, I don't care because it works so well as a character-driven episode. Also, this bit was quite funny.
I hope he hurries up. I wouldn't want him to be late for the fireworks. He's after me!
I don't think he'll be late, said Duck. Ahoy, mateys!
Toby had a little lamb. This is going to sound really weird after what I bashed Rusty Saves the Day for, as this episode has a massive inconsistency or retcon with Toby using his old branch line to bring a vet to a farm where Farmer McColl's sheep start lambing. Why am I not losing my mind over such a change to Toby's old line, previously thought to be closed down since Series 1? I'll tell you why. They tell the sweetest, most wholesome story of Toby, with our favourite tram engine being 100% in character.
Help! My wheels are wobbling, he cried.
Mostly. Not only that, but the terror of the constant snowstorm he is fighting through all by himself combined with that suspenseful music all throughout, especially when he gets to the old bridge, make for one hell of a story where you're unsure if he'll make it in time, which makes it all the more touching and just so fuzzy when he does, and allows the lambs to be kept warm inside his coach Henrietta. I'd say this is probably his best episode of the entire series tied with Toby and the Stout Gentleman, but as always, it just couldn't beat number 1.
Ahoy, mateys!
Gordon takes a tumble. If there is one thing you can always count on from going from series to series, Gordon is, for the most part, one of, if not the most consistent character in the show. It's very hard not to write a good story or plot points with him, and this episode is just that. Just a nice little episode of Gordon trying to keep his image when he feels threatened by Salty's constant teasing, which in true Gordon fashion leads to him making an even bigger fool of himself when he tries to pull a goods train really fast and accidentally gets switched onto a branch line, causing him to fall off the tracks when he becomes even more big-headed over signs saying go slow, leading to a spectacular crash. This episode doesn't really break the mould with a new dive into Gordon's character, but it does tell a simple story of what we love from a Gordon episode, acting like he's bigger than he actually is, crashing or ends up looking silly, and learning his lesson. A classic Audrey style of writing when it comes to story. Combined with those beautiful nighttime shots I mentioned before, this is the best episode of Series 6 to me. Nothing majorly impactful, but only because it doesn't try to be and stays simple and enjoyable. Now wait a second, before I give my conclusive thoughts on Series 6, there's one more thing that I want to do first. See, these review videos for Thomas and Friends, in the short time they've been on my channel, have quickly become some of my most viewed on this channel, and that's all down to you at home watching these. With that said, I wanted to find a way to give back to you what you gave to me, both for this video and eventually for the Series 7 video when it comes around. So I did just that. I reached out to fans of the series and asked them to give their thoughts and opinions on Series 6 and compile them together to show in my video. This way I feel like you get to hear multiple voices on Series 6 rather than just my own, and thankfully we had a lot of very friendly participants. Here are their thoughts.
Right, my favourite thing would either have to be the accidents or the narration. I found the crashes to be very memorable, especially Percy's Chocolate Crunch, which is a good contender for the most serious accident this show's ever had. Duncan's was also interesting. I have fond memories of using the toys to recreate his venture up the incline, and Gordon Takes a Tumble is simply insane. Can we get a video meme where it's just going on forever and he's crashing into anything, whether it's in or out the franchise? Regardless of whether or not that exists yet, I do want to see that. And Angelus's narration for the series, it feels almost as lively as his Series 3 narration. It's rather strange how the visuals are starting to lose their quality, but the narration is trying harder to excite the viewer. My guess is that this was a decision made for Angelus to achieve a stronger appeal for the preschool audience, what were being prioritised. It only works in this series though, and I think the worst crime this series commits would be the inaccurate characterisation. It's not all over the place, but this is the series where everyone's inconsistencies are beginning to show. Percy begins his descent into what I can only imagine is supposed to be an audience stand-in, this being that preschool audience. This also preys on the overused Arian Burt, the Scarloey engines, and the Scottish twins. Most people say Bill and Ben were done dirty, but I disagree. While Twin Trouble is a refreshing story that I don't mind, it sets in stone for the remainder of the show's run that Donald and Douglas are the argumentative brothers, despite everything they've been through? I don't think so. It might be slightly cheating, but I'm going to give the 2-pack episodes my place of favourite. Each episode from the series is enjoyable in its own right, but watching Jack Jumps In actually left me craving answers from the next episode, which were rewarding once I found a friend in need. It's perhaps the closest we'd get to a Railway Series style of storytelling for at least another decade. Sorry 40 whistles. If, though, I'm only allowed the 1 episode, and not a 2-parter, then I'm going to grant it to the runner-up, Percy's Chocolate Crunch. I've already mentioned a crash in this one, but this got me obsessively collecting the Mr. Jolly's Chocolate Factory merchandise, and I had the VHS, which might have been my first exposure to Series 6. Percy stays in character, and it feels like the story hits every beat just right. It's an overall winner, really. And thank you, Luke, for getting us all to participate in this video. You don't know whether you're keeping this bit in or not, but I just thought I'd give you my thanks because this is awesome.
Season 6 of Thomas Tank Engine. To be honest, I don't remember it as much as Season 5. I mean, Season 5 had like Cranky's Bug, Horrid Lorries. It had all these crash scenes, especially Rusty the Boulder, which was, mind you, that's like my favourite episode of Season 5, all the explosions and everything. But I don't remember anything about Season 6, and it must be a really letdown. if I don't remember it. That said, I just don't remember much about Season 6. I mean, was it filmed after Thomas Tank Engine Magic Railroad? Was it filmed before that film? Was it filmed between Season 5? I don't know. But to me, it wasn't a letdown, but it wasn't as great as Season 5. Season 5 was just boom, bang, bang. I mean, you had like Duncan the Spooky Train. I can't remember what it was now. But it's just a massive letdown, and I'm really sad. I'm really sad about it. I mean, I think the only detail of it was it Percy's Chocolate Crunch? With the only crash scene? It was better than Season 8 onwards, don't get me wrong. But it was just a downgrade from Season 5. That's all I've got to say about Season 6. It's still there. I just don't remember it, so I can't really comment about it. Average season, average series. It's just a downgrade, which is really sad.
Firstly, my favourite part of Season 6 is that it introduced more characters that weren't railway engines, such as the Jack Pack. The least favourite part of Season 6 was basically any episode that seemed just a little bit lazily written. I mean, for instance, Percy and the Naughty Gnomes, that was just a bit okay. Percy does not know what subsidence is, despite the fact that he's worked in a quarry. I'm sorry, you can't tell me that he works in a quarry and does not know what subsidence is, despite the fact he's been in the show for 6 series now. Also, my favourite episode of Season 6, that's a little hard because there are quite a few good episodes, but I think my ultimate favourite would have to be Harvey to the Rescue, because prior to Harvey to the Rescue, I never knew that crane engines existed. And I also like how we got a subtle moral of not being prejudiced towards others just because they don't look like we do. Because remember, I think it was Gordon who said that it was like, it doesn't even look like a proper engine. I think that was Gordon. Can't remember who it was really, but I think it was Gordon. Second favourite of Season 6 I might mention is the Fogman, because it shows how technology can be a great help to us, but at the same time we should never forget the old tried and tested methods. It's like the Fat Controller simply saying like, oh, Cyril, he'll just enjoy a nice retirement. Look, I've got my fancy dancy new fogger on. That part of the episode I feel is a bit dry, because I'm like, given the Fat Controller's track record, I don't honestly think he'd dismiss a railway employee who's given such dedicated service with that amount of disdain, really. And so that is my opinion on Thomas the Tank Engine Season 6.
Upon my recent full viewing of the series for the first time, I have to say that Series 6 is my least favourite of the classic series. For all the greatly written new characters that feel natural to the universe, the subtle use of humour, and the laid-back tone made to feel more relaxing than Series 5, It's let down by its severe lack of continuity and geography of Sodor, the inconsistent and sometimes very dumb behaving old characters, the stories with morals that feel more forced than previously, and just plain ugly visuals. It's far from the worst thing imaginable for the franchise. Hell, it's not even that bad of a series looking at it as a whole. But talk about a massive step down in terms of quality. There are some great episodes with great character moments, and it holds a lot of nostalgia for fans like myself born in the early 2000s, but it's still heavily flawed. Do I still enjoy it? Hell yes. Can I recommend it to people to watch? Absolutely. Would I immediately jump to an episode from this series over some of the peak moments of Series 1 to 4 and parts of Series 5? Not a chance. What we have is a low-ranking series, but still carries the charm of the franchise. I'd like to thank the very kind people who contributed to having their voices heard in this video. Joseph, Sam Orm, and Matt Davies. It was cool of you to share your thoughts, and I'm glad I could give you a chance for them to be heard in a somewhat professional review. What's more, I'd like to take this opportunity to announce something big for my channel. I have a Patreon now! Want to gain access to behind the scenes screenshots of my up-and-coming reviews, have your name appear and or be read at the end of my video, gain early access to my reviews 1 week before they're meant to be released on YouTube? Now you can! Just follow the link in the description and become a patron. Every contribution will be very much appreciated. And with that done and dusted, I'll see you guys next time for what is the final chapter of the classic series of Thomas and Friends, Series 7. So, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're watching this. And Happy New Year.